Hey friends, it's Theta again, aka the Monotone Messiah, aka your friendly neighborhood nihilist. As you can see, I've added this sweet new idling screen so that you don't have to look at frozen frames of a match anymore while I'm trying to get a point across. It's got this sweet pulsing background thing that makes me look more mysterious and cool than I really am. Plus my Twitter handle's in the top left-hand corner. Hint hint, wink wink. Anyway, the reason I'm making this video is that lately there's been more of a focus on tactics. Specifically, and I find this both hilarious and ironic, my most popular video to date was the one I just released about joining the league. And all that video was me giving step-by-step instructions in a browser window about how to join the VRML and get into competitive Onward. That's pretty much the definition of tactical. And I say hilarious and ironic because it's the only video I have so far where there's zero footage from Onward, and somehow that is the most popular one. I mean, I'm happy to help, but I just find that really funny. Anyway, what I'm trying to get across by bringing all this up is that while I think tactics are all well and good, and I do plan on going further into specific types of tactics in the future, what I really want to do in my work is bring out the fundamental principles of games, of competition, of winning, so on and so forth. What I'm trying to create in something like this video you're about to watch is a conceptual framework that works not just in Onward, but works in anything that you do that's competitive, any kind of games you engage in. I would argue you could even take it into things like business if you really think about it at a first principles level. So with all that in mind, I found that a lot of even advanced players don't really think about these things explicitly. A lot of what I'm going to say here, you'll likely understand at an intuitive level, but it's amazing to me that even really high-level people don't think about these things explicitly. And when I say that, what I mean is that they can't really put words to their behaviors and their justifications for those behaviors. They just say, well, I'm doing this thing because it results in me winning, more or less. Now, I found that people at the very tippy top tend to be a little more intellectual than that. They're the ones that are thinking things through. They, they read, they think deeply about these sorts of subjects. But I know that not everybody's primed to do that. So my goal here is to kind of bring out that kind of thinking about your game. The harsh truth is that it's not just about hours in the game. It is about thinking carefully about what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, being critical of your own play, being critical of your kind of foundational thoughts about the games that you're playing. So, you're probably asking yourself, what is the fundamental topic I'm going to bring up today? The answer to that is going to come in just a moment, but I want to introduce a concept that's one level above it. And that concept is asymmetry. You might be asking yourself this question: what is an asymmetry? In the context of games, an asymmetry represents a one-sided advantage. Every game has different kinds of asymmetries, and within each situation, those asymmetries can have different levels of impact. What I mean by that is that an asymmetry is an unfair advantage, but those unfair advantages are predicated on specific situations. Not every situation calls for every type of asymmetry. You'll understand what I mean more by that as we go through this, but just keep that in mind as we're moving forward. Asymmetries are highly contextual. If you want to be even more simplistic and clear about what an asymmetry is, think about an asymmetry as a gap. If I have an asymmetry over you, it means that there's some sort of substantial gap between us. For example, in fighting, the simplest asymmetry that I can think of is weight. If you and I step into the cage to scrap, and the gap between our weights is 50 pounds, then I have a substantial weight asymmetry over you, which means that I have a higher probability of winning. A simple Onward example would be hours played. There's a big difference between the skill of someone with 100 hours and someone with 500, and there's a big difference between that same person with 500 hours and somebody with 3,000. This is a dynamic that exists. In fact, it's one of the dynamics that makes breaking into the top 5 competitively really, really hard, because the people at the top have, in many cases, thousands of hours, and even people with many hundreds of hours, let's say between 500 and 1,000, those people are just going to have a very, very hard time overcoming that gap. The way I think about this is as a seesaw. I'll bring up a picture just to kind of illustrate the point. So if you think of a competition like these two people, and I found this image and thought it was great because these two people are both wearing VR headsets on the seesaw for reasons I'll never understand. But the asymmetries in a game operate very much like a seesaw. So whoever is lower has some sort of advantage, and that advantage is transient. So in one specific situation, they're the one holding down the seesaw. That provides them that advantage in that specific situation. The other side adapts. They enter a new situation, and then the other side is now the one holding the seesaw down. That's what it's like at the very top for the most part. Like, it's just transient advantages going back and forth. If you're in a much more extreme case, let's say like a brand new player versus somebody who's on the number 1 team, then it would be more like one person just permanently on the ground and the other person up in the sky. That's not very common. In most cases, asymmetries are transient one way or another, but it does happen. You could say maybe the experience gap is sort of like that situation I just described. Before I go any further into the specific type of asymmetry that I want to focus on in this video, there's 2 qualifiers that I want you to keep in mind. Number 1 is that asymmetries get smaller and smaller the higher up you go on the competitive ladder, which is what I was just alluding to. Top competitors do everything they can to maximize their advantages, and therefore the gaps between them tend to be very small, or in many cases non-existent. So if you, just to use an Onward example again, if you take the number 1 and the number 2 team at any given time, it's unlikely that there's going to be a really big hours in the game gap between the two. If there's going to be some sort of asymmetry between them, it's not going to be hours played. It might be, one team is better at a certain map, or there's better team dynamics, they have better communication systems, they have better game planning, whatever, but it's not going to be hours played. It's just, that advantage, you kind of have to squash that advantage in order to get to the top. I wouldn't say that's a permanent feature of the game, but at least that's how it feels a lot of the time. Anyway, competition at a high level tends to become a matter of eking out any asymmetry that can be found, no matter how small. And you can see this in regular sports too. It's the reason a lot of people do steroids. It's the reason a lot of people cheat, whatever. It's like, it's very hard to find asymmetries at the top. And so people will do whatever it takes to just even get a 1% advantage over their competitors, because at the highest level, that 1% really matters. Now, the second qualifier that I want you to keep in mind, it's very important to think about this throughout your play, throughout watching this video, whatever, is that asymmetries don't guarantee victory, even in extreme cases. To go back to the fighting example, just because someone weighs 50 pounds more than you doesn't mean that you're going to get beat up. Maybe you're trained and that other person isn't. Maybe you're faster than them. There's always, in some sense, an asymmetry that can be discovered even in seemingly hopeless situations. So I want you to remember that. Don't feel like asymmetries are just permanent and incapable of being overcome, because in most cases that's not true. To use the Onward example, someone with 10 times your hours isn't going to kill you every round. They might kill you a lot, they might end up winning the match, but that doesn't mean every time you play they're going to squash you. It's a highly probabilistic game with a lot of variance, so just remember that the asymmetries that exist between you and anybody else, they don't just automatically mean you're going to lose or you're going to win. In fact, it's in some sense important to remember that, more important I should say, if you're on the top, because people will get lazy and they start thinking, oh, well, I have so many more hours, or I'm so much better at this thing that I do, that I don't have to keep getting better, I don't have to adapt, I don't have to be careful, and that's when people start losing and they start falling off. So don't be that person. With all of that out of the way, with all those concepts and big-headed ideas being shoved down your throat, there is one specific type of asymmetry that I want to focus on because, in my opinion, it is the most important type of asymmetry in Onward. And that asymmetry is information asymmetry. Most people who play Onward and other probabilistic games have an intuitive understanding of what information asymmetry means. But just to reiterate my point from earlier, my goal here is to make sure that you can think about these things in explicit terms, which in turn allows you to think more intelligently about your game and improve more rapidly. At a high level, information asymmetry can be found in games such as Onward, where information can and should be hidden from opponents. In games like that, it's what's called imperfect information, and this stands in contrast to games with what's called perfect information, like chess. If you look at this chessboard, you can get an intuitive understanding of what that means because everybody can see everybody's pieces. There's nothing to be hidden here. There are asymmetries that exist in chess, but there is not information asymmetry, because information asymmetry would require something to be hidden. Now, you can hide your intentions, you can hide your skill level, which is known as hustling, and there's all these other types of asymmetries you can generate between people, but in terms of the game state itself, which is really what matters for our discussion, there's nothing that can be hidden. So it's a game of perfect information. This stands in contrast to Onward, where, as we'll find out, there are all kinds of imperfect information situations. So to highlight what I mean, let's look at a round of Onward. Now, every game of Onward starts with 2 bits of information symmetry. Number 1 is that we all know who is on the other team. So if you take this match, for example, this is between beginners and Globochem. This is the Season 9 finals, and everybody knows who everybody is. It's not a mystery, so you're never going to walk into a game and there's never going to be anonymous players or anything. Everyone's going to know everybody else, especially at this level. You're going to know the tendencies of each other. And the other side of it is that everybody knows what the objective is. So nobody's walking into this not knowing that the objective is in this spot. So there's some amount of equality between sides. I will say there is potential for asymmetries to exist here, with more experienced players having a better grasp of how to handle a given objective and/or an individual player. So for example, if you played this map and objective 10 times more than people you're facing off against, then you have a serious informational advantage. Likewise, if you play these people many times and can make educated guesses about their tendencies. In this particular match, for example, Globochem knew that beginners play very slowly and they spend a lot of time probing, so they had a little miniature dance party. You can actually see it right here. There's 3 of them in this little building on the left side. Because they knew that beginners were not going to push up. Now, that can be a dangerous assumption to make, but in this case, they were fine, they were correct. They had played against beginners so many times, they knew their tendencies, that it was okay to just hang out and more or less goof off on cast while these guys tried to figure things out. With all that being said, once the game starts, information asymmetry starts to play a role. As you can see here, Pause is poking through this doorway trying to figure out if anybody is in a specific spot. And then his friend over here, whose name I can't read right off the top of my bat, I think that's Smoils, but anyway, they're probing as well. This is the whole game of information asymmetry writ large. Why? Because nobody knows exactly where the defenders are going to be from the Marsoc perspective, and nobody knows for sure, even though they made an educated guess about their speed, nobody knows for sure exactly when or where the other team, the Marsoc squad will be attacking. Now in Onward, the key thing to keep in mind, just for those of you who are new, is that Volk doesn't know where Marsoc spawns, at least on long-range maps. Cargo, not so much. But no matter what, Marsoc isn't aware of what defensive positions they'll take. There are common spots that people like to take advantage of, but you still don't know for sure, so a lot of the game is what beginners are doing right here, which is trying to figure out where the defenders are. Now, people often talk about how Volk has the advantage by default, and that's true. But where does the advantage come from? In my opinion, the advantage is born out of the information asymmetry they can exploit from the very beginning. Both teams start hidden, but only Volk has the option of clustering around the objective and gathering information. Marsoc, on the other hand, must probe the defense to figure out where defenders are, and in most cases they can only do that by risking being spotted. So there's a risk-reward equation that must be weighed for people who are attacking, whereas defenders can sit back and just let the clock tick away. The closer you get to the end of the round, the more risk needs to be taken. But there are positions, especially on larger maps like Downfall, where Volk can simply sit and wait for Marsoc players to cross a line and take them out. That advantage doesn't exist for Marsoc. Marsoc must, by virtue of being on offense, and I'm just sort of repeating myself here, but I need to reiterate, and having a clock ticking, they have to take risks to gather their information. In other words, both sides have to take some kind of risk to gather information because both sides have to be able to see each other, but Volk does not have anywhere near the same level of risk as Marsoc does, because they can just sit around the objective and hold a line that a Marsoc player has to cross in order to get near the objective, or at least consider crossing in order to get to the objective, and that advantage only exists for one side. Take it a little bit further. We can divide the types of information asymmetry that matter the most in Onward into two types. Number one is audio symmetry, and number two is visual symmetry. Let's start with audio asymmetry. Gunshots are the most common way to determine position. Therefore, they represent an important piece of the information asymmetry puzzle. Marsoc players have to be very careful about how they shoot and when they shoot, because they start out hidden. Nobody knows where they spawn, at least on the maps of multiple spawn areas. And therefore, they need to just really think before they fire shots, because that will break their information asymmetry. It ruins their surprise to some degree, unless it's well timed with a separate attack, so on and so forth. And Volk players have another problem as well, in that Volk players can remain hidden, but in most cases they must fire gunshots in order to kill their opponents. By firing their guns, this breaks that Volk player's informational advantage and in turn exposes them to refrags from Marsoc players. This happens all the time. A person is sitting in a spot, they see one enemy player come around a corner, they shoot them. Now everybody else who is near them, including maybe the person that was right behind that enemy player, knows there is somebody waiting in the wings for the next person, or maybe not, just they know that there's somebody there, and they'll spin around the corner and refrag. This dynamic is, if you're new to the game, why people flip out if you're on Marsoc on one of those maps with random spawns and someone shoots off rounds in spawn. Because once that information asymmetry is broken, the Volk team can orient their defense towards that spawn and even push out more aggressively to isolate them in one area of the map. This means that the knife, which doesn't get talked about very much, is therefore not just a great way to get style points on cast, but it's an excellent way to maintain information asymmetry, because whoever uses the knife does not expose their position by giving off audio cues. Their audio asymmetry is maintained. Now, the best example I know of the masterful use of a knife to maintain audio asymmetry and therefore win a round came from the season 8 match between Globochem and G-Men. And as you can see here, Auto is defending the objective. This is in the East Market objective. And Zach Fontaine is approaching from the hallway. He's crouched, so he's very hard to hear. Otto is facing the other direction. He has no idea that Zach Fontaine is there. And Zach Fontaine uses the knife to maintain his audio asymmetry. rather than spoil the surprise, I'll just show you what happens. So he's coming around the corner here. He knows he's there. I don't know if he saw him or he just knew that Otto at that point in time liked to use that spot a lot, whatever. Point is that Otto was not aware of him, but he had seen him, or at least made an educated guess that Otto was around the corner, and whipped out his knife. Reaches over, stabs him, totally silent. And most people are not sitting around just staring at their tablet. Sometimes people will prop their tablet up, but in most cases people are waiting for gunshots to check their tablet, and Zach knew that. So here he goes, he stabs him.
He gets Otto.
You can see here that one of the GlobalCam players is still looking that way. You look on the map, there's another guy over far east. Nobody knows that Otto has just died. Information asymmetry here has been kept complete. The information overall asymmetry here is a big deal, especially since Zach Fontaine was the last one. If he had been spotted, if anybody knew he was there, he would have been toast. Instead, he used the knife, maintained information asymmetry.
Go down with the knife, and Sri Lankan doesn't hear it. He's not going to check on the backside. And Zach Fontaine in the 1v3 gets...
On a 1v3, he caps. Purely because he understood, at least at an implicit level, the power of audio asymmetry. Another example that highlights the power of audio asymmetry in a less positive light comes from my team's match against Rome, and it's hard to see on this footage, and I'm running this at the highest resolution possible. It's still just hard to get, it's a little grainy. So this is me right here, and William Dunce on Rome is up in these hills. I think that's him right there. All I could see was just a tiny little dot, and I managed to get lucky here.
I'm just wondering if they're going to be able to...
In just a moment, I spot him.
Mike, I wonder if they're going to be anticipating William's position. I do see some lasers pointed that way, so they might know that he's up there.
Okay, and then I fire off a few rounds, and I downed him.
Oh, yeah,
The reason I'm highlighting this footage is because I did not know, first of all, that I had got him. So there was, asymmetry. It was not realized at that point because I didn't know if he was dead. So I fired off gunshots and maybe even compromised myself to some degree because I gave away my position by shooting at him, and I didn't know if that had even paid off. I mean, I thought it was worth the risk. It turned out to be the case, but I could have just hurt myself by firing and missing such a long shot. But the reason I wanted to show this is because William was only downed, which means that he can call me out, which in turn hurts the information asymmetry equation towards Rome. Now Wookie runs over here and he gets the knife on William, but not before we all got called out. He had a pretty good view from up here, I imagine. So Wookie comes and he pulls his knife out to be as silent as possible. This is another common practice you'll see at the higher levels. People do not shoot to down people because they don't want to give away their position. They'll run up and knife them. But it's an important thing to think about anytime you're playing, because downing and finishing your kills is so important. If you don't do that, you might be taking somebody out of the game, but you're not taking them out of the game completely. And because of the asymmetry that exists, especially at a distance, if you can't hear them speaking over their mic, you may not even know that that information asymmetry is there. I mean, you might think that person is completely out of the game. Meanwhile, they're calling you out and they're resolving information asymmetry for their teammates because they can see your position, they can see your movements. Now let's talk about visual asymmetry. Now, resolving visual asymmetry, in other words, trying to get a sighting of somebody, is usually accomplished by peeking. As I mentioned before, this is risky for both sides, and if you don't do it correctly, it can result in getting shot, or at the very least breaking information asymmetry in a way that doesn't favor you. In other words, you peek, you don't see anything, but they see you. That's the least optimal situation when you're trying to resolve visual asymmetry. I'm not going to go into the specifics of peeking here because that is, believe it or not, the subject of a future video that I already have planned out, and I'm going to be releasing that soon. So just want to say that peeking is a valuable tactic with a certain risk-reward profile that you need to think hard about whenever you're trying to figure out where the other team is, but we're not going to talk about that in depth today. There are, however, two specific methods for resolving asymmetry that I want to get into. The first method is sniping. The obvious example to use here is Mike Crook, because everybody that plays against Mike Crook is terrified of his sniping with good reason, myself included. I've had my head blown off by that guy more times than I can count. Overall, if you're on a long-range map against him, your team better have a strategy for coping with his sniping, or you will pay the price. But beyond the fact that he can pick you off, why is the presence of a good sniper like Mike such a big deal? Well, the answer is, you guessed it, information asymmetry. A good sniper doesn't just have the ability to take people out from a distance, which is its own form of asymmetry that I won't go into here. They have the ability to identify enemy positions in a way that's very hard to counter. You can see here from this footage that Mike isn't just sitting there looking through his scope. This is kind of funny too. Raph is waving his tablet around to try to draw fire, which is kind of an interesting way to bait people into breaking information asymmetry in a way that doesn't work for them.
Boxes of smoke.
But in general, you can see Mike is way back here, and his role, I mean, he just killed somebody, which is great. Obviously, you like it when a team loses, or your opposing team loses a player because of your sniper, but really, it's not just about killing. Like I said, they have the ability to identify enemy positions in a way that is just really hard to deal with, because they're information asymmetry machines. They can look through their scope and spot you without you having any idea you've been spotted. It is the ultimate form of information asymmetry. If they don't know that they're being watched, they're going to behave differently than if they know that they are being watched and they know that they can counter the sniper. Now, even if you're in a match with Mike and you know that he's going to snipe, there's always some uncertainty about where he is and how much he can see. And that's a problem. This effect is particularly devastating when we're talking about Volk snipers, because they can fire early in the round without any repercussions. Marsoc has to protect its spawn location and be very careful about taking shots, whereas a Volk player can fire at will the moment they see a Marsoc player. And I'm going to take that frame off for now. So a Volk sniper can therefore not only gather information, but they can take shots really early. A Marsoc sniper can fire early and be valuable, but if it's done at the wrong time, it can give away valuable information about their team's position that can then come back to haunt them. And that's why, in most cases, Marsoc snipers are better off being intel gatherers, at least early in the round. The second method is using drones. And a drone represents an interesting case of both information symmetry and asymmetry. It makes noise from the moment from the moment it's launched, which means that anyone who launches it is at risk of exposing the location of their team. On the other hand, it can be used to identify where defenders are laying in wait, which breaks the Volk informational advantage. So a Volk squad has to consider the trade-offs on the other side of that, because if they shoot it down, the shots can expose the defender's positions, and if they don't shoot it down, they risk being exposed without shutting off that information valve. So it's something that both sides have to think carefully about using, or I should say on Volk's side of shooting down. And in this short clip, we're going to see the use of a drone in the north alleyway and subway. So as you can see, the drone's over here. Mike Crook hears it, shoots it down.
And that's interesting, because
now,
you would think if you're going to use the...
There wasn't a ton of information gathered, but it did provide some intel that they were watching this north stairway. Not that unusual. In fact, it's very common on this objective to have people pushed up like this. Either way, it confirmed a suspicion that someone's there, and Mike made the right choice by shooting it down and then rotating. The biggest mistake you can make in a situation like that is you can shoot a drone down and then stay there. So you can see the trade-off in action there. In my opinion, there are a lot of risks involved with using drones, and I don't think anyone has really mastered their use yet. I remain skeptical that there is an optimal way to do it that can be figured out. I think there are some issues with drones in general. That's just my personal opinion. I've seen people use them well, and as you just saw in the previous footage, it's used by people in the final, so I think that's just partially my own lack of experience with the drones. I will say, though, that one of my more comical moments in the league
I don't think Theta's
came during our
expecting it.
match
He's
against
not looking
Rome,
that way.
same match that I brought up before. Now, just for some context, I had heard a drone while I was over in this area defending, and Gladiator on Rome has a reputation for using drones. Knew the drone was coming from the back, and I figured, you know what? At this point, we'd already won the match. So just a disclaimer, this is kind of a reckless thing to do for a defender, but we had already won the first 2 maps, so the third one was just, basically go out and have fun. And I figured, hey, I'll go and see if I can kill a drone operator.
Cutting a bit more mid.
As you'll see, I'm running.
So he has this advantage here.
And this is an interesting case of information asymmetry because I knew that there was a drone, and I knew that there was a drone operator back here somewhere, but even then I still didn't know exactly where it was.
Looks up from his tablet.
And rather than tell you exactly what happens, I'll just let you see it and giggle for yourself.
Oh, wow.
And
Oh my gosh.
Look at this. He just
that's right. I ran past him, but to bring up audio asymmetry again, I did hear Gladiator's big booming voice giving out callouts, and he was so focused on it, he didn't know I was there.
They didn't even
So
see
you can
each
see
other.
here, I hear his voice, turn around, and shoot him. I think that embodies the risks of using drones pretty well. So, there's all these asymmetries you have to deal with, and on top of that, your attention gets focused. That being said, if it's used correctly, I've, again, seen beginners use it well. I've seen even Gladiator use it well in both matches and just casual play. It is an interesting way to break visual asymmetry because you can spot people, and you can even just draw gunfire and figure out exactly where defenders are hanging out. Even if you don't see them, you use that audio asymmetry by virtue of just flying over them and them shooting you down. An important question to ask at this point is, how do you create information asymmetry? Because just being aware of information asymmetries that are going to be built into the game, that's all well and good. That's something you need to think about and study and so forth. But it's even more important to try and create information asymmetries artificially. You want to go out of your way to confuse your opponents if you can and use information asymmetry against them. That's the mark of an excellent competitor, is using advantages in the right context and making sure the other person cannot adapt to those. So the simple answer to the question of how do you create information asymmetry, at least in Onward, is to be very cautious about what sights and sounds you're willing to risk and try to create confusing signals whenever you can. And the first place we can do that is with distractions. And the example I'm going to use here of a distraction, a distraction comes from our match in Season 9 against G-Men. In fact, this was included in my match review against them, Season 9 G-Men match. It's in my YouTube channel if you're curious. Anyway, what was going on here, for your own reference, if you haven't seen that video or if you've forgotten about it, is that the defenders that are left on G-Men, there's 4 of them here, they're all focusing right now on this north alleyway because James is up here causing havoc. He's been firing down here, he's throwing a smoke, all that good stuff. So not only is this guy thinking about how to come up and deal with that, but there's several other defenders and they're all focused on this north side. Meanwhile, I've been crawling through the south. So there is a bunch of asymmetry that doesn't favor James here because they all know where he is. He's got one avenue of attack, and he has no idea what their positions are other than the fact that they're around the objective. On the other side of things, I have maintained a high level of asymmetry because I have been crouching. My audio asymmetry is near complete, and my visual asymmetry is as well because nobody's seen me. Nobody knows I'm coming in from the south. So let's see what happens. You can see that's my laser here, and I'm about to pop out. Okay, so right here, they start to realize too late that I'm in the south. I just take them down, and then this guy, now my information asymmetry has been broken because I fired those rounds and took those 2 out. Now he knows that I'm there. Like I was just talking about, the element of surprise matters, but the moment you fire your gun, it's gone. And he's about to come around and refrag. I do trade with him at the very least, but it cost me my life. The point here is, once again, that distractions matter. So having this smoke here that not only is a visual distraction, people will focus on bright red colors like that. The other side of it is that there is an audio distraction. Smokes are very loud, and there's gunshots going off because they keep exchanging fire. So nobody was really paying attention anywhere except where this distraction was occurring. They knew there's a player down here. They've been, again, exchanging fire. Nobody was focused on the south. And it's very easy in those situations to generate and take advantage of information asymmetries, which is exactly what happened. The other mechanism you can use that's common but I think is not well understood or implemented is smoke grenades. Now, smokes represent another really interesting risk-reward trade-off because the information communicated can be contradictory, and it can also hurt you badly if they're not used in the right way. So first off, let's just get something established that smokes are a signal, and whether that's a useful signal or not depends on how you use them. They can be used to give away your position, but they can also be used to focus attention on an area that you don't actually care about. So it ties into that whole distraction topic we just covered. James had used a smoke as a distraction in that previous clip. And many teams will throw smokes in one place and then rotate around to another location because it is a common practice for people to move through smokes. In other words, they'll use the smoke and then they'll kind of crawl through, hoping they don't get noticed, which means that the other team has an incentive to focus on that smoke for a little while. It's not just being dumb. It actually makes sense to look at that smoke. And the other common use of smokes is to hide movement on larger maps. In other words, to maintain some level of information asymmetry by trading off some visual asymmetry in the sense that people will know where those grenades came from. They will see the grenades themselves and think to themselves, okay, something is happening in that area. Now, the problem is that when you're using smokes like that, they might get you to where you want to go. They might give you the cover you're looking for, but they can also give away your position, and it can cost you. And that's why I brought up this clip. It's between Ember and Globochem. Kind of ties into the sniping thing as well. So you can see here there's a laser being painted on this position. They're all focusing now on these smokes. And they knew that Mike was watching. And this is the reason they use smoke, which is a smart thing to do. You should be doing that when you know that there's a sniper watching you. You are wise to make that trade-off because, yes, they may know you're there, but if you run out in the open with a sniper, not only will they know you're there, but they'll have a very easy avenue to kill you. And it backfires to some degree in this instance because there was a gap in the smoke. So you can see here, they did smoke. They did a pretty good job, but they just left this one avenue out. If they had put a couple more smokes right here, they would have been safe and out of Mike's line of sight. But just because there was that one gap, they kind of got the worst of both worlds. Not only was it clear where they were, where they had spawned, so on and so forth, but now they were wide open for a sniper who could not only shoot them, but call them out.
Come out, but it's not effective enough as Hail.
See, he throws that smoke a little late there, and Hailfire goes down.
Oh, but Hailfire goes down.
And then he gets confirmed. So it did work out to some degree. Most of them made it across, but it was at a very high cost. And that's what you have to be careful with. Again, this is a matter of creating the asymmetry or resolving it. You know, it just depends on how you use them. They were trying to create some type of asymmetry in exchange for losing some of it, and it just didn't pay off. On the other hand, smokes can be used in a way that gets you exactly what you want, which is that you get to advance on the map. They might know where you are roughly, but it doesn't give away enough information for the other team to really hurt you. I thought this was a great example. This was Globochem versus SEAL Team Bravo. You can see here Izzy is kind of leading the way, as is Thunder Pilot, and they're concealing the entire team here, or at least most of the team. So SEAL Team Bravo obviously knew they were moving to Center Hotel. It didn't change the fact that they couldn't see them. So they could have wasted ammo or whatever. In this situation, it creates a dilemma because, yes, everybody has kind of common spots, like these are not unusual spots for defense, but if any of these guys just fire randomly into the smoke without being able to confirm that they're hitting somebody, now Globo has information on them. And this is another mark of great competitive players, is that they force dilemmas all the time. and they make you make bad choices. So in this case, SEAL Team Bravo decided that they were just going to stay silent on this and let them move up. And the problem there is that now you've got Globochem not too far from objective, and you don't know what their positions are other than the fact that they have moved up to this. And you don't know how many are there either. It could have just been 1 or 2. It could be the whole team. You just don't know. So they're creating an information asymmetry there through the use of smokes, and it didn't cost them much. And it's a common situation where the team will push up to Center Hotel because it's such a controlling place. So it's not like they were really breaking expectations there by using smokes. But it got them there without giving away too much. So they created asymmetry for SEAL Team Bravo. Oof, I have been talking for a while. So let's jump to the conclusion here, because I could talk about this for hours and I could keep giving you examples, but that's not going to be too useful to you. I think this is plenty for you to chew on. If you have any questions or anything, you can certainly ask me, again, on my Twitter account at the top left, Theta VR. But let's just at a high level talk about what can be gleaned from all this. In my opinion, the fundamental idea is this: an effective player must always understand and be cognizant of the information flows within a game. This is true not just in Onward, but any game of imperfect information. Minor actions might seem like they aren't a big deal, but the slightest sound or an overly wide corner peak can shift the direction of a round, and in turn shift an entire game. You should think of information as a sort of zero-sum exchange. When you have information that your opponents want, you need to keep it to yourself as long as you can. And then, if the situation comes up when you must exchange it, when you must reveal something, you must make them pay the highest cost possible for obtaining that information. So if you think back to that smoke example we just covered with Globochem, as they are moving to Center Hotel, because they concealed their movements, they presented a situation where if SEAL Team Bravo wanted to get the information out of, or exploit that situation and maybe try to kill one of them through the smoke, they are paying a pretty high cost for that, because Globo will know where they are by virtue of their gunshots. Those are the kinds of situations you want to be presenting to your opponents all the time. I'll just say that one more time. If you're going to give away information, make them pay the highest cost possible for it. Never just give away information for free. Great players, to paraphrase Ryan Hall, who's a famous fighter, great players never take themselves out of good position, but they always put the other person in bad positions. And it's no different when you're dealing with information. You want to force that dynamic on your opponents as much as possible. Stay hidden. And if you have to reveal yourself, because eventually you will have to fire a gun and so forth, then make sure you're doing it in a way that they can't react intelligently to it. Furthermore, whoever maintains asymmetry for the longest and makes the other side pay the highest price to acquire information will, in the long run, be a winner. All the top teams in Onward do this, and if you want to get better, you need to adopt this style of thinking as well. You need to think in asymmetric terms, and specifically you need to be very aware of information asymmetry. Alright, that was a pretty long video, so I'm going to cut it off there. Like I said, I could go on and on about this. Hopefully this is enough for you to really think about how to adjust your game, how to think about information asymmetry in your day-to-day game situations, maybe even in situations outside of Onward. So if you have any thoughts about this video, the concept, my silky monotone voice, whatever, feel free to leave them in the comments or hit me up on Twitter at ThetaVR. Until next time, this is Theta saying over and out.